You're listening to Big World Network.
Subprimeval, Season 3, Episode 9, Critical Mass, Part 3. Written by Robert S.C. Cutler. Read by Fentress O. Moore. "Get it off me! Get it off me!" Corporal Ramsey cried while kicking and screaming at the creature that had hold of his leg. Sergeant Keene doubled back, rushing to Ramsey's aid, and unloaded the magazine of his M16 into the body of the creature. "I just spilled its intestines all over the ground and the goddamn bastard won't die," Sergeant Keene exclaimed. "Jesus Christ, what the fuck are these things?" "Shoot it again," Corporal Ramsey pleaded. Halfway inside the abandoned house's doorway, he clawed at an Afghan rug as unbearable pain shot up from his foot all the way to his hip. Looking up at the entryway wall covered in family photos, shotgun blasts, and splatters of blood, he was certain his own death was imminent. He had precious little time left in this world, and he sure as hell didn't want to spend it with this demon eating him alive. Thinking of his young wife and little girl, Corporal Ramsey removed a hand grenade with trembling hands from his belt, pulled the pin, and tossed it at the creature's head. Ramsey shouting, "Fire in the hole!" was the last thing Sergeant Keene heard before he was knocked backward by the concussion of the grenade blast. Keene opened his eyes to an out-of-focus world. His fellow soldiers calling his name seemed to be miles away. The sensation of floating just above the ground caused his stomach to turn and then vomit up that evening's offering of MREs. "He's puking," one of the soldiers carrying him to safety announced. "Turn his head." "I warned you about eating the beef stew, you nasty ass." Sergeant Rice laughed at Keene. "Barbecue chicken is always your best bet." Keene blinked his eyes, trying to focus. "I'll try and remember that," he slurred. "Keep your eyes open," a medic said while shining a pinlight in Keene's eyes. "No concussion. As soon as he knocks the cobwebs loose, he can get back to work." "Is that jerk serious?" asked Keene. "My entire body is buzzing. My muscles feel like rubber." "Don't worry about it," Sergeant Rice said. "We're bugging out in less than 5 anyway. Minneapolis is a goner, and those things are frickin' everywhere. St. Paul has already been given the order to evacuate." "Did Ramsey make it?" asked Keene. "No, but he took 3 of those bastards with him." "They're getting ready to close the roads," a soldier yelled to Rice. "You heard the man. Pull back and don't stop until you're 100 yards from the east bank of the Mississippi," Sergeant Rice commanded. "Those monsters don't stop coming, do they?" asked Keene as Rice helped him into a Humvee. Rice shook his head. "Dallas clear up to Duluth, and then east to Illinois has been infested. Attacks in and around the refugee camps in Indiana, Kentucky, and Ohio have become so commonplace that the government is planning on moving them further east. The camps in Texas and Colorado haven't been affected, though. It's the nutcase civilians that refugees have to worry about in those gun-happy states. It's like the frickin' Wild West." Special Agent Riley stood on a hillside overlooking a refugee camp near Colorado Springs. The lush, green field the tent city was built upon was now a sea of mud and trash. The 10-foot barbed wire fencing encircling the camp, which was supposedly erected to keep the refugees safe from rowdy locals, was more effective in keeping the displaced civilians from leaving. "I can smell their stench all the way up here," Riley said while holding his hand over his nose and mouth. "I thought you said we were going to be upwind." "Sorry, sir, the winds must have changed direction on us," a young agent replied. He looked down and away, fidgeting slightly. "You know how I despise excuses," Riley sneered. "Are we on schedule for Operation Freefall?" The agent perked up, knowing he had all the answers ready. "Yes, sir. The meal rations have been cut in half and the food has been allowed to spoil. The water supply has been contaminated with human waste and the portable latrines haven't been emptied or cleaned in 2 weeks." "Jesus, I don't want them dead, just unhealthy," Riley griped. "Yes, sir. No, sir," the agent stuttered. "At least give them some clean water. I need both the young and old and everyone else in between for this mission, and I need them to be alive." Freakshow sat hunched over at his laptop in the facility's cafeteria, searching every website dedicated to Mesopotamia and Mesopotamian demon folklore. His eyes were bloodshot, and his head ached from his eyeballs to the back of his skull. Ever since the canisters containing 10,000-year-old frozen remains of 3 creatures had arrived, the lab had been operating 24/7. Finding nothing of relevance on the internet, Freakshow picked up his mug to get another shot at Dr. LaCroix's potently strong coffee. As the lukewarm liquid touched his lips, something buzzed against them. Pulling the cup away from his mouth, he noticed 2 flies doing the backstroke in his mug. "Gross!" Freakshow yelled. "Did you find something?" LaCroix asked as she walked into the room. "Just 2 unwanted guests in my coffee, but nothing on our subjects," Freakshow said while still staring into his mug. "Well, we did. Come to the lab and I'll show you what Dr. Chalmers and I have been working on." On a 60-inch flat-screen monitor outside of the main lab, Dr. Chalmers had an image of what appeared to be a common bacteria. "Is this from the samples? Looks like what we have swimming around inside of us these days," Freakshow said. "Very similar to modern bacteria, but with one nasty little difference," LaCroix said. "This one acts like bacterial meningitis but kills more quickly. It leaves the animal brain dead within 30 minutes after exposure. Not only is it an efficient killer, it is easily spread. The creatures are cannibalistic by nature, so when one falls victim to the bacteria, it will be consumed by its own kind. The deadly bacteria are then spread to the consumer, and the cycle repeats itself. We have a pretty good idea that this vicious one-celled animal once pushed our creatures to the brink of extinction. Without its presence in the modern world, they were free to multiply and expand their territory without any real threat, with the exception of people. Since we're against using human subjects, how are we supposed to introduce the bacteria into the creature's body?" asked Freakshow. "It's not like we can just run around the country sticking every creature we see in the butt with a syringe." "It's going to be a very slow process, I'm afraid," LaCroix said. "We'll need to trap some, inject them, and then set them free. And 10 years later, we've cut their numbers in half, and people are still dying." Claire Davis stood outside the lodging facility's main entrance with her hands on her belly, looking up at the stars. The constant traffic through the lobby, folks on their way to the gym, rec room, or cafeteria, had suddenly stopped since Gator had returned from his trip. Only Cassie and her friend Trina would occasionally wander her way in an attempt to relieve their cabin fever. Even though both girls liked Claire, they still saw her as an extension of Riley's authoritarianism and kept their distance. "What are you doing outside?" Gator asked her. "There's been a bunch of sightings in Kokomo and Wabash, and Riley says it's not safe to leave the building at night. What's going to happen to us, Clem?" "We're having a baby in 2 months. I know that's going to happen," Gator grinned. Claire placed her hands in Gator's and looked him in the eyes. "I mean, with all of this, we'd wanted a baby for so long, but when I found out I was finally pregnant, all I could feel was fear. And Clem, 7 months later, I'm still afraid." "Afraid of what? We're safe here. There probably isn't anywhere safer." "Do you trust Riley?" asked Claire. "Sure, why wouldn't I? He gave us these great jobs. We actually have enough money to buy a house now, and he treats us like we're his own kids." Claire removed her hand from Gator's and looked out across the field adjacent to the facility. "I overheard him talking just before he left this morning. I heard him clearly say our names and then something about refugee camps. And when he walked past me, he wouldn't look my way, even after I said hello. He has a lot on his mind these days. I'm sure it was nothing. Heck, he might have been talking about my trip in a couple of weeks. I'm delivering badly needed medicine to all of the camps as soon as our technicians finish making it." Claire shook her head. "No, it wasn't that simple. Riley mentioned Cassie and Trina's names too. They were to be sent to Texas, and I was to be sent somewhere east. He said he was tying up some loose ends. Doesn't that concern you?" Gator couldn't give Claire an answer that wasn't a lie. He had been sworn to secrecy by Riley himself. By the time the antibiotic for the refugee camps were ready, this facility would be shut down, and all of its occupants moved to a safer place. Most were headed to Texas and Colorado, while he and Claire were being sent east. Trust me, "We're going to be okay," Gator said while giving Claire a squeeze. "Riley's going to take good care of us."
Music by Kevin MacLeod.
You're listening to Big World Network.